morning. It is a pleasure to be with you today, and I appreciate the elders allowing me to be here for this series of lessons on marriage, family, and the home. And I was here 4 years ago when we did a grief workshop, but I hope that anything that I say will not be a grief to you, but will be something helpful in that regard. You are to have two handouts. One of them says to be the best parent you can be. The other one is things to remember when children become teenagers. If you do not have both of those, if you'll raise your hands, these fellows will get those to you. See a few folks here to my right, somebody over on the left. I want to begin with a disclaimer, and that is that you are not looking at a perfect husband or a perfect parent in that regard. Brother Jim said, why don't you say a little bit about yourself? And so I will say I have one wife, I have two boys, I have two great daughter-in-laws, and five wonderful grandchildren, ages 2 to 12. And so, especially this morning in this lesson here, I'm going to be drawing from folks from the past as well as folks from the present. I was able, when I preached at the North Carolina congregation in the Florence, Alabama area, to have some wonderful, godly parents and grandparents that shared with me some of this information that is before you today. And so I hope that you'll want to follow along with what we're going to be talking about, and that this will be something that will be beneficial for you. Under the idea of being the best parent that you can be, and I'll just go number one, number two, and you can fill in the blanks as you'd like to. I think it's very important, first of all, number one, that we make our mate and not our children the center of our home and our life. Make our mate and not our children the center of our home and life. Now, children are a gift from God, according to Psalm 127, verses 3 through 5. And he says, happy is the man that has his quiver full of children. How wonderful it is. What a great blessing they are. At the same time, God did not intend for the home to evolve around the children. There is that relationship of the husband and wife. God, who knew what he was doing, made a woman out of the side of man. He didn't make a child automatically. He could have chosen to have done that there in the Garden of Eden. But he made a husband, and then he made a wife. And then in Ephesians chapter 5, when God is likening the love that we are to have for our mates with the greatest love, Christ for his church, listen to what he says in verses 22 through 25. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Notice that he contrasts this great love that Christ had for the church with the love of a husband for his wife and a wife for her husband. He didn't say anything about children there. The point is that that was the part of the relationship that God wants us to remember in regards to the home itself. Too many people live for the children. And yes, we must take care of their needs. We must provide for their needs. But there is a time when hopefully they're going to leave home. And it's going to be just the husband and the wife. And they need to have that relationship that they have had throughout the entirety of those children, that they can continue to grow and continue to thrive in. A preacher friend of mine who had 4 brothers along with himself made the statement, after 30 years, my mom could not wait until the last brother left to divorce my dad and get out on her own. Parents need to learn to communicate love and care for each other before they bring a child into the world. Another godly parent put it this way: children need to realize that they are not the center of the universe. Others have needs. especially the elderly in the family and also in the church. And so make your mate, not the child, the center of your life or of that home. Number 2, pray for your children before they are born. Pray for your children before they are born. One parent put it this way: pray for their health, their well-being, that they will come to know God, serve God, and love Him. Over in Judges chapter 13, verse 12, an angel came to the wife of Manoah and said, you're going to have a son, and you're not to cut his hair, and you're not to have him take any kind of wine. We're talking about Samson here. And Manoah asked that angel of the Lord in Judges 13, verse 12, how shall we order the child, and how shall we do unto him? He was wanting to know, before the child was even conceived in the womb, how are we to direct this child? How are we to lead this child? Pray for your children before they are born. Over in Luke chapter 1, verse 13, there's a very interesting story about a very godly parents. Their name were Zachariah and Elizabeth. The Bible says that they were blameless, that they were righteous before God, but also that they were well stricken in years, and that she was barren. She did not have the ability to have a child. Yet this priest, as he is in the temple of God, doing the work that he is doing, has an angel come to him. And in Luke chapter 1, verse 13, he says, your prayer, Zechariah, is heard, and your wife will bear you a son, and you shall call him John. Imagine that. Here was a man well advanced in age. His wife could not have children. They had tried, and yet he was still praying for that. And that prayer was answered. Number 3, do not allow others to do your parenting for you. Do not allow others to do your parenting for you. If God had meant grandparents to raise their grandchildren, He would have given them to them in the first place. Now, grandparents are wonderful, and how great they are. And it does take a community to raise a child. You need all the help you can get. That's wonderful. But parents have that God-given responsibility and privilege, and no one can take the place of a mom or a dad within their own home. Number 4, let your children know what you expect of them. What you expect of them. To be good Christians, to have good manners, to make good grades, to do their best. If you expect less than their best, they will know that, and they will do as you expect. Teach them your desires, your philosophy, your model for living early in life. Some psychologists have said that the greatest period of time in learning for a child's life is between the age of 5 and 6. They need to know early what you desire for them to do. One godly grandparent put it this way: before our children could pronounce the words husband, Christian, and college, we taught them to pray for a Christian mate, the opportunity to get a Christian education, and wisdom in choosing Christian friends. I have 2 granddaughters that live in Huntsville, Alabama. They attend the Meridianville Church of Christ there. On Sunday nights before church services, they have a little Pew Packers class. You may have something like that as well. At age 2, this little granddaughter, Reese, would be able to say the words, one man, one woman, she couldn't say it right, for life in marriage. Now, she didn't understand those words, but instilling that in them. And then another question that they would ask them, what's the greatest desire you ever have? And her answer would be to go to heaven with God. At age 2, she could say the words. My hope and prayer is she'll know what those words mean in time to come. Early in life, we need to teach them what we expect and desire of them. Number 5 is so important. Let them see God in all you do and say. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, these words were always a part of the synagogue worship, and they would begin the synagogue worship. The Jews would, every Sabbath, reading these words or saying these words. Begin with verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. The point was that in all that they did, whether in play, whether in work, whether in worship, those children were to see God in everything that those parents did. He said there in verse 6, these words, loving God with everything you've got, shall be in your heart, and then you will teach them diligently to your children. As one person said, what you are thunders so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. It's not what we say, but it's what we do. And when our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren see our love and respect for God in all that we do, then they're going to get the message. You cannot teach what you do not know. You cannot lead where you do not go. It's so important that we take the time to show them what is so important. One parent said, missing worship services and Bible study is not an option in our family. Another one said, show them what God is always first in our lives, regardless of where we are or what we are doing. Another person made the point that it was important in this idea of showing them the love of God to always talk the church up and not to talk the church down. Mac Layton put it this way: you can mark it down that where parents have roasted elders or French fried preacher or stewed song leaders for dinner, ultimately the children, hearing the negativism, will leave the church in homes where parents are grumbly hateful instead of humbly grateful. Disaster is ahead in the lives of their children. How many times have you seen children, after a period of time, leave that home because of the way folks within the church were discussed or talked about? Number 6, this is especially true for those with younger children or younger grandchildren. Use teachable moments to study the Bible with your children. It's great to be able to come 3 times a week to church, but they need more than this. They need Bible devotionals or Bible thoughts or Bible times throughout the week. A father announced to his family that they were going to have a devotional. The 5-year-old reached over and grabbed a songbook and he said, "It's time for the commotion." Well, he got the word wrong, but at least he knew it was something religious. Let nature help teach your children about God. Just think about all the beautiful things around you that you can use to open up discussions about things. We have 3 other grandchildren that live in Kentucky. We don't get to see them quite as much, and so when we go, we try to stay 2 or 3 days. They have in their backyard a treehouse. What's interesting is that my son was able to build that treehouse around the trunk of the tree. So the tree is actually growing up through the treehouse, which is about 10 foot up in the air. Well, one day, I climbed the steps with them, and we got in the treehouse. And we began to talk about this tree, and of course, they were touching the tree and everything. And then we began to talk about the trees of the Bible. And it was interesting for them to think about, what does the Bible say about trees? We talked about Zacchaeus, getting up in the tree. We ended with the tree of the cross and our Lord being upon it. But we just used that as an opportunity to allow them something that they could think about in that regard. if you have younger children or younger grandchildren and they're spending time with you, study some of the stories of the Bible. Not too long ago, we were there in Kentucky, and so every morning we would begin with a devotional, and we would act out the stories after we talked about them. We talked about Balaam and the donkey and the significance of, listening to what God has to say. And then we acted out that story, and every one of them wanted to be the donkey. I thought that was somewhat funny. But I hope they'll never forget it, because we saw it in the Bible, but then we acted it out. Make the devotional short and personal. Sing songs on their level. Let them participate. Maybe the morning time's not the best time. Maybe before bed. Whatever the case may be. But use teachable moments to study the Bible with your children. Number 7, let the punishment fit the crime. Let the punishment fit the crime. Listen to this statement. Remember that a little present punishment, when the occasion arises, is much more effectual than the threatening of a greater punishment should the fault be renewed. Guess who said that? Alexander Campbell in 1860 in his book, Rules for Home Education. It's just as true today as it was then. Let the punishment fit the crime. When they do something, take care of it. Sometimes we say, well, you better wait. You just wait till your daddy gets here, or you wait till your mama gets here. That's just saying, okay, this parent's not going to take care of the discipline, but oh no, and I have to fear him. Take care of it. Deal with it then. Number 8, do not reward negative behavior. Again, this statement, do not reward negative behavior. Never give your children anything because they cry for it. Once again, guess who said that? Alexander Campbell, almost 150 years ago. How many times have we seen parents, or sometimes grandparents, cave in at Walmart when a child throws a fit or starts crying because they want something? You tell them this isn't the time for that, we don't have the money for it, or we're just in here to buy groceries and that's it. And yet, because that child keeps on operating and working on that parent or grandparent, they cave in, and no doesn't really mean no. And guess what? As they get older, they'll realize that as well. That just because they said I can't do this, that really doesn't mean that I can't do it, because way back early, I learned that no really doesn't mean no. Don't reward negative behavior. Number 9, make worship a joy to look forward to, not a drudgery to endure. Make worship a joy to look forward to, not a drudgery to endure. This is especially true for little children, or parents with little children, or maybe grandparents. If you want your children to be involved and to enjoy going to worship, sit up toward the front so that they can see and participate. How can they be a part of something when there's so many adults sitting in front of them and they can't see what's going on? Secondly, have them to meet and know those that are participating in the worship service. Last night, I enjoyed eating with your elders and Van and Mary Ann. And there were some little ones there, and I noticed how Van and Mary Ann both were interacting with these little ones, and how that they were just running up to them and weren't afraid of them. There's something to be said for that. Those children are going to grow up, and later on in life, when they have problems or struggles, they're going to remember that relationship with those elders or with that minister, and they're going to come to them for advice. Let them know that it's not something to fear, but that these are wonderful people that they need to be a part of. Thirdly, don't rush your child in regards to the worship. Get to church in plenty of time. Give them money that they can give. That's something that they look forward to when those plates come around. Give them the opportunity to do that, and then you can tell stories about what that is. Also, number 4, in regards to this idea, set the standard for behavior high and maintain it in worship services. I'm a preacher's kid, and therefore my dad would always be in the pulpit. Dad preached for some 66 years and just recently retired. But we would sit early in life with our mother. I also have an identical twin brother. So typically, whenever I got in trouble, he got in trouble because we were in trouble together. Typically, doing things that we shouldn't do, pulling on one's ear or whatever the case may be. And so going out was the job of my mom. In Northport, Alabama, where my dad preached for 57 years as a minister there would be these sticker bushes that got those little red berries on them. You know what I'm talking about? There was some, I don't know who did it, but somebody had strategically planned those bushes to have a width just wide enough and just deep enough for a parent and one child to get behind and get taken care of. And so not only were Ron and I spanked, but we had to watch the other one getting spanked, and that terrible punishment. And then we knew it was coming. Talk about being traumatized. But we realized that if we didn't do what we needed to do, that we were going to be taken out again. And on some occasions, that was the case. I heard about a father who had a little 6-year-old, and he'd given him all the rope that he could. And yet this 6-year-old just continued to misbehave. And finally he had had enough. Threw the little boy over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, began to go up the aisle. The boy, looking back, looked at the audience and said, "Y'all pray for me now here." Our children need to know we're in the presence of God. We're in the presence of God's Word. We need to be respectful, and we need to set the standards high. Make worship something to enjoy. And then number 10, children need limits. Children need limits. Everybody needs limitations. Everybody needs to have boundaries. If a parent holds firm in the small stuff when children are very young, they will be making them ready for when no still means no in the teenage years. A Christian kindergarten teacher of 15 years who's taught little children put it this way: teach your children to be obedient, not just compliant. If you do not, then they will make you pay for doing what you want them to do. Compliant means they bargain with you. Well, I'll do this if you buy me that. Or I'll do this if I get to. Obedience is doing it right because it's right with no strings attached. Well, let's look about the handout on the teenage years and some things concerning that. I live in a subdivision in Killen, Alabama, known as Ridgecrest. And often when I'm walking there where the houses are, there are some parent killdeer birds that will flop around and act like they're injured because they want me to follow them and get away from their little ones. And the idea is that we must guard and protect our homes and our children the same way. Number 1, under the idea of raising teenagers, because I said so, is a legitimate answer in the raising of children. There are times you don't have the opportunity to explain. There are times you don't need to explain. Because I said so is good enough. God has given you the right and the privilege of leading your home. And you don't have to explain everything. And sometimes there's not a time for that. Number 2, allow the church to help raise your teenagers. When our boys got old enough to drive, we told them that driving a vehicle was a privilege. It wasn't a responsibility. In other words, they could live without driving their own vehicles if they chose to disobey the rules that we set forth. And I told them, I said, there are going to be hundreds of eyes in this community watching you as you drive. If one of them calls us and says, I saw Matt running down that road real fast, or I saw Ben going through a stop sign, then that's all it's going to take. You're going to be grounded. On 3 different occasions, I got those phone calls from Christian people that may well have saved their lives by telling us what they saw. It wasn't anything terrible, but it was driving too fast on a dirt road or something of that nature. When I told my son, they said, well, who called? I said, somebody who loves you. Well, what did they say? This is what they said. You're grounded. A week at a time. And if they happened to do something the next week when they got their keys back, it was doubled. One of them didn't drive for almost a month, but he got the point that we really meant what we said. I dropped him off there at school right in front of all his friends. He didn't like that either. But again, I was trying to get their attention. There's rules to be followed. Number 3, parents of teenagers need to be spies with stethoscopes. You need to keep your eyes open to everything that you are seeing among your teenagers, how they are acting, who they are with. If they're resisting you meeting their friends, something is wrong. Listen carefully to what they do and do not say. Sometimes they're going to tell on themselves. Ask those questions that you have the right and privilege of asking. Where are you going? Who are you going to be with? Don't say, now when will you be home? You tell them. You're the parent. You tell them when you expect them to be home. What are you going to be doing? Say you're going to so-and-so's house. There were a few occasions when we would call so-and-so's house and say, hey, are my boys over there? Just to make sure that they were there. If they say, well, I don't know who we're going to be with. I don't know what we're going to do. That wasn't good enough in our home. You either had to have a plan or else you weren't going anywhere. Also, we chose that anything that came into our home was open to inspection. Magazines, pictures, letters. If they came into our home, if we needed to open them, we would do so. Along with the same idea, number 5, shield their friends. Shield their friends. One person said a peer group is often the best window of his or her life. Who are they hanging with? That may say a lot about the direction in which they're headed. 1 Corinthians 15:33, be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good morals or corrupt good manners. As one person said, it only takes one hole in the fence to let the sheep out. We've got to plug those holes. We've got to make sure that they're with the best of people. We moved to the Florence, Alabama area in 1994 to be the minister of the North Carolina congregation. One of our boys was going into the 7th grade. That's a challenging time. New school, especially junior high. And so he was wanting to try to make good friends, and he met a friend there at school, and he thought he was a good fellow. We talked to his parents. He wanted him to come home and spend the night with us. And so on a Friday night, they camped out in the backyard in a tent, this new friend. The next day, Lisa was going to the tent and was cleaning out things and straightening things out as they were out in the fields playing. And out of the backpack that this young man had brought, a girly magazine fell out. Well, as I said, she was there to clean things up. And so she just picked that up and threw it in the trash, and nothing else was said. Later on, that young man wanted our son to come to his house to spend the night. And we just said no, because we couldn't chance that in regards to the friends that he needed to be around. Number 6, have a home where your teens and their friends can hang out. It's better to watch them at your place than wonder where they are somewhere else. And so if possible, have a bonus room. That's what we had, and they hung out there with their friends. One thing we also learned was that if you have lots of food, that invited teenagers to want to come and stay a long time and eat your good food. And so that was something that they often did. Number 7, when your teenagers are out dating or whatever the case, whatever they're doing, make sure they do not come home to a house that is asleep. When your teenagers are out, make sure they do not come home to a house that is asleep. My point is, a parent needs to be up when your child comes home. If they come home at 11, if they come home at 11:30, or whatever the case may be, one of us, typically my wife, especially if it was on a Saturday night, would stay up. We did that for various reasons. First of all, to make sure that they were okay. Secondly, to make sure that they were in on time. Thirdly, to make sure that, that anything that they needed to talk about that was on their mind, they could do so. One wise mama would be there in the recliner, but she told her boys, when you come in, if I happen to be asleep, you've got to wake me up. They would wake her up, and then she would give them a good night kiss before they went to bed. Later on, she said that kiss was, first of all, to show them that I loved and cared for them. But secondly, it was for me to make sure that there was no smell of alcohol or tobacco or drugs. We are the parents, and we must make sure that they do as well as possible. A couple of weeks ago, my father-in-law passed away, and when we were around his bed a couple of days before that time, my sister-in-law told the story. She said, Don, do you remember the first time that you dated Lisa, which is my wife, and her sister? And I said, yes. It was on July the 10th. We saw Sound of Music, the movie. She said, yes, but do you realize that first time that you came to our house, that Daddy talked to you in the house, but he sent me outside to put down your driver's license plate? I said, no, I did not know anything about that. But once again, it was that idea of, even though you're a preacher's kid, even though I know who your parents are, I wanted to do that. Something important about that. Number 8, eat at least 2 meals together. Sometimes lunch is not possible because of work or because of school, but if at all possible, breakfast and supper need to be eaten together as a family. It's not the food, it's the idea of being together, it's the idea of communication, it's the idea of oneness that families need to have. Number 9, involve your children in every single youth function provided by the church. Involve your children in every single youth function provided by the church. Let them know early where your priorities are in regards to church. A study of 2,300 Christian teens found out that the number one factor in developing the faith of teenagers were church camps and youth retreats. Regular church attendance was the second most given answer. Our rule was at our house, when they got old enough to work, we don't mind you working a part-time job, provided that you know, first of all, that we're going to take care of your necessities, your basic needs. And secondly, that work not interfere with church services. You tell your boss up front, I'll be glad to work anytime I can, but I need to be in church. Do you know what we found out? Those bosses appreciated that. One of them said, we realize that church is a commitment. We want those kind of workers in our workforce. And so they worked around his schedule and their schedule in regards to that. Number 10, choose your battles. Say yes to your children as much as you can. There's some things that's always going to be no, regardless of the time, regardless of whatever. We had a rule at our house, as long as you live under our home, your hair is going to be cut. You can't allow it to be long and whatever. One of them came home from Freed-Hardeman. They all attended Freed-Hardeman University, met wonderful wives there. One of them came home the first year and one of the first times, and he had his hair cut, but he had orange blonde highlights. It didn't look good at all. But one of the boys was doing it free for anybody who wanted them. We didn't say a word. We said, that's your hair, sort of sad looking, but at least at least the hair was cut. Number 11, communicate early and often with your children. Early and often. Write long letters to them about what's important to you, what's important to them. Leave that letter where they can see it. Curiosity is going to get the best of them. Now with social media, you can leave voicemails, things that are important to you. They'll save that voicemail. In times of trouble, they're going to listen that mom and dad still care. Text. They'll hear your tone and inflection in those messages. Communicate early and often to them. Number 12, do not let your children date too soon. Studies have shown, so many studies, that the earlier a person dates, the more likely they're going to be involved in immorality because they don't have the wherewithal, the maturity to sometimes say no. And so it's very important that you not allow them to date too soon. Number 13, along with this same idea, let them know from the earliest of times, and this again was our rule, that they date only Christians. Simple. Your date's going to be your mate. You're not going to marry somebody you don't date. So you need to spend time with the people that's going to build you up, that's going to lead you to heaven and not further away. As parents or grandparents, point them toward good Christian people. I remember when we didn't date till we were 16, but I remember my mom saying, hey, that Robertson girl over there in Cottondale, I think you would enjoy going out with her. Next week, I'll be married to her for 40 years. I'm grateful that Mom sort of pointed me in that direction, and she was certainly right. Number 14, choose a Christian education to help direct your children's lives. Choose a Christian education. The three most important questions in life will be, who will you serve, who will you marry, and what will you do in life? Christian educations help answer all of those things. One parent called the idea of a Christian education their insurance for their children, and then some. There's no cost too great for the salvation of your children's souls. Love your child's soul more than you do your child. Sometimes decisions that you make may not be popular with them. They may not like you at all. You will not win Parent or Grandparent of the Year award. But you're saying what you're saying because you love their soul. You want them in heaven more than you want them to like you because of what you may or may not say now. That's so very important. And then, as we close this idea, always look for the good in your children. Sometimes you may have to look hard. Sometimes they're supposed to clean their rooms and everything's so messy. One parent came in, she was looking around, everything was a mess. She looked up and she said, you really have a clean ceiling? Look for the good in your children. God's way is not always the easiest, but it's always the best way. My hope is that something we've said today will help you in your parenting, and thank you for your very kind attention.